Welcome to the Leader Pulse podcast, the podcast for leaders revolutionizing the world of work. I'm Holly Tate, Chief Services Officer here at Leader. And in today's episode, I am so excited for you to get to hear the raw, unfiltered conversation with me and Marie Myers, Chief Financial Officer at Hewlett-Packard Enterprises. If you've been following our podcast over this season, you've gotten to hear from Marie and her 3 hot takes as Matt and I unpacked her challenge for us to be innovative and make sure that we're leading change in a really effective and intentional way at our organization. And so in today's episode, you get to hear our entire conversation unedited. So with that, enjoy today's Leader Pulse podcast. Marie, I'm curious, let's start with that first one. One of the things that really stuck out to me in your bio was the fact that you are known to be a CFO who is strategic and visionary that fuels innovation and performance, which I don't hear finance and innovation often in the same sentence. So I'm curious, how have you become known as that person, and why do you think it's important to have finance and innovation together?
Yeah, no, well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here. And it's a great question. You're spot on. Most CFOs don't typically have innovation in their sort of vocabulary right up front. But look, I would say today, I don't think you can be a CFO of a global company and not have a ways to support your business to grow and innovate. We're in a period of just phenomenal disruption. Some people would say we're in the fifth, industrial revolution, or maybe we've just come out of the fourth, but we're in an age where digital disruption is just moving so fast, and what goes along with that is innovation. So you've got to be able to figure out how to sort of do 2 things at once. And I like to say how you're going to manage the business, manage the cost, and at the same time take some of that proceeds and then fuel it back into innovation, which obviously drives growth and then drives the value of the company. Ultimately, the stock price and value for shareholders and all your stakeholders. So to me, it's a balancing act. And a CFO has a unique role because they can typically sort of manage that balance in the organization that many other folks can't. You think about it, your business leaders, they probably completely they completely resonate with innovation and driving growth. You go talk to your typical sort of finance group, and they'll be typically focused on cost. And so you've got to be somewhere in the organization, the two and the trade-offs between the two needs to come together. And I really think today that a CFO is well equipped, frankly, to play that role in a company.
So what are some practical examples of how a CFO, or even if we're not a CFO, but business executives, can think about leveraging financials to spur innovation? Because on the one hand, I would think, I don't want my CFO to be super creative, because I want them to make sure we're buttoned up and that we're not doing anything wrong or illegal, et cetera. So what are some tangible examples of what that looks like to spur innovation using our financial models or strategic planning?
Yeah, no, first of all, the CFO's role is a fiduciary role, and I take that one, I might add, really seriously. But the area that comes to mind that is the most obvious is capital allocation. Like the CFO ultimately kind of gets a big stake in driving the capital allocation framework for the company. If that capital allocation framework is linked to driving growth and driving value, driving innovation, then to me that's the role that I think the CFO can really play. And that may be allocating investment dollars that they've seen through inefficiencies in one part of the company, taking those investment dollars and then reallocating those dollars back to drive, for example, innovation. And I'll be honest, through the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to be in a situation as a CFO where we were driving phenomenal capital returns. And so I had the opportunity to really find key initiatives in the company that we could use to drive long-term growth. And then frankly, part of it was investing in the digital architecture of the organization. So, took some of those proceeds that we saw in the COVID pandemic and then reallocated that very quickly into transformation and digital assets that were able to really transform the company. So that's just one example. But I think being the steward of capital in the company is an enormous balancing act. And I think that's, to me, the opportunity that the CFO really has.
That is so true. And that's a really good segue into something that I've heard you say before, which is that CFOs need to be knowledgeable about all aspects of the business, and that we should be sharing our unique insights with the board, not just the financials. And so I'm curious, for those of it, like, that sounds great. Like, I love the idea of that. As any executive, that we have a broad understanding about what's happening across the business. But one thing that I often hear from newer executives, or especially mid-level managers that are wanting to grow into an executive role, is how do I do that, but with balancing what I've been told, which is stay in your lane, or focus on what's right in front of you today. Let the executive team worry about that. So, what advice would you give for that leader who agrees with you and wants to have that broad insight and speak into other parts of the company, but doesn't feel like they have maybe the authority or the insight in order to do that?
Yeah, so first of all, I like to think as a CFO as a strategic business partner. They should be the partner to the business on multiple fronts. So everything from ensuring you make your numbers through to, as we discussed earlier, capital allocation and helping them kind of navigate what is typically pretty choppy waters out there. So I really think about a CFO in that regard. And when I think about that, that means that a CFO needs to have a broad set of experiences. One way to develop what I call sort of enterprise leadership or enterprise acumen is by frankly doing different jobs. And if I look back at my own career, I've done a lot of different things, and they haven't always been pure finance. In fact, my first job in corporate America, I was a product manager of a very important product for the company, and so it helped me to understand how that process works. I worked really closely with engineers. I then spent probably the better part of my career in finance, and then the later part of my career running. Being involved in IT transformation, digital transformation, leading IT departments, cybersecurity, and then most recently, for the last few years, I've sat on a number of boards. So that experience set gives me, I think, a really good wealth of enterprise knowledge. And therefore when I sort of groom CFOs, I really encourage them to go out and get broad experiences. And there's numerous ways to get those experiences. It can be inside the company you're working for. It could be taking a board seat somewhere else where you get an outside in view. It could be by taking a rotation where you're at into a role that is not even in your normal sort of, could be moving out of finance and into the business or moving into marketing. I'm a big believer in those breadth roles really pay off in the long run. I believe life is the long game, it's not the short game. And so all those experiences just prepare you for the sort of long term. In terms of not offending your business partners, I kind of look at that as more the how than the what. I think people generally appreciate enterprise views. One of the things that I think holds back organizations is complacency and being siloed in your decision making, because it just doesn't benefit customers, shareholders, stakeholders. I think the way to think about life is go back and think about who matters in terms of what you do. What matters are the employees of the company, the customers you serve, and the shareholders who take a bet on you. And if you use that perspective, it'll always guide you to do the right thing. I've never been bothered by corporate politics. One of the most important jobs I ever had in my career. In fact, I was a junior person. I was an IC, individual contributor. And I remember working on an initiative that was really disruptive. And it was that initiative about 25 years ago that gave me the sort of know-how on how to navigate, the subject you just brought up. It's not easy. Sometimes people get offended, but always go back and think about what is the right thing to do. What would a customer want you to do? What would an employee want you to do? And what would a shareholder want you to do? And you can tick off the box and it's yes, it's the right thing to do.
That is so good, Marie. There were so many nuggets there. I feel like one of the things I learned was, especially if you're early on in your career, but even if you're not, go get various experience from wherever you can find it, whether it's going and sitting on boards or finding projects within your company that you can learn and grow from to get various experience. That's so good. And then don't worry about the politics, worry about what the right thing to do is and use your North Star as
Yeah.
what would our customer want for us? What would our shareholder want for us? Those are really, really strong takeaways. That's awesome. Okay, the last question I have for you is around change management. So you mentioned this a few minutes ago of, a lot of people are saying that we're maybe in the fourth or fifth industrial revolution. So we're constantly facing change. The most recent, and you're in a change making organization with technology. So especially with AI and all the other things that we're inundated with right now, how do you, as an executive of such a large corporation that has so much influence, thinking about leading change management well for the company and your employees?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off with my own personal view on change. I think all of us, irrespective of what you do, need to be lifelong learners. If you go into life thinking that you don't know everything and that you're always learning, you'll be a great change master. If you go into it thinking you know it all, you'll be a terrible change master. So I kind of use that as my personal North Star, that everything, you need to learn. Like, I'm constantly trying to learn about AI myself. And so I'm a CFO, but I take time to educate myself, learn. I did an AI summit meeting up in New York this Monday, and I learned a lot from the people on the panel. I was technically the keynote, but I learned a lot from everybody else that was there. And it was great. And I'm not shy to admit that, hey, I got a lot to learn in this space. But I think one of the forgotten arts in this age of digital transformation and disruption is change management. It tends to be the piece of the equation that's always left out, or it's always an afterthought. And frankly, it's the most important sort of first step. If you don't incorporate change management into major initiatives and projects, then more than likely most programs fail. And I think there's some statistics out there. I know some of the consulting firms have shared that something more than 50% of a lot of transformation initiatives fail. And I would say one of the big reasons for that is lack of change management. So one, you kind of need to have your own mindset. And I think, lifelong learning, being a learner, being willing to constantly open your mind to new ideas is certainly the right sort of mindset. But secondly, you need to incorporate change management into all elements of sort of program and project administration. If you don't do that, you will fail and you'll find yourself sort of coming up against a brick wall and wondering why this program wasn't working. And frankly, change management is usually the reason for that. And it's an afterthought. People typically are like, hey, it's too expensive. I don't feel like doing it. And it's hard to find people with the right skills. When you go out in the market and you look for people, it's really hard to find someone actually who's a change manager. Try Googling that on LinkedIn, try Googling it on the internet and see how many people come back with that job sort of capability or skill. It is a rare one to find.
So true. How do you balance being effective at change management without slowing down innovation? How do you manage that?
Sometimes in life, you've got to go slow to go fast. I learned that about a quarter of a century ago. It was one of the best things I ever learned. Change management requires you to sort of take the time to understand the situation you're in first and what needs to change, and then bring people along with you so they will help drive that change. Then you'll speed up and gather momentum. If you don't do that right up the front, then you'll find yourself halfway or through, the end of the program with a big mess on your hands. So my advice has always been spend the time up front. It might slow you down a little initially, but you will gather momentum and pace, because when you've got influence and when you have your stakeholders engaged, you typically gather a lot of momentum.
One more question on that topic. Um, how do you as a leader know when it's time to slow down? So sorry.
No, it's all right.
To
Take your
slow
time.
down, to go fast, or that it's like, I cannot afford to slow down. I got to make this change now. Like, what are some, maybe in your story or your career, where you've, kind of cashed in those change management chips in order to say, this is so important that we have to do it today, versus, or is it always that you should slow down in order to go fast? What do you
Yeah,
think?
look, I love moving fast. I'm the first one, I believe in getting stuff done. They call me Miss GSD sometimes, but, you know, I have no offense to driving change fast, but I do think you've got to do it the right way. What I've learned is, unless you have some sort of burning platform where people can really rally around you, it's very difficult to get people to engage. And so that's why and then getting people engaged and then having the right initiatives to help drive change is so important. I would say the places I've been in my career where perhaps the project hasn't worked out as well, it's probably because we didn't invest enough time. I personally wanted to go too fast. So I think doing it right, taking a little bit of a slower pause up front is going to be a long-term success.
So good. I've made that mistake too many times already in my career of going too fast and not bringing the team along on the journey.
Yeah,
Thank you for that reminder, Marie. Well, thank you.
no
I learned
worries.
a lot today. Thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your learnings and what effective leadership looks like, not only as a CFO, but as a business leader. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Leader Pulse podcast. Few things I want to remind you of. Go to our website, leader.com, in order to sign up for our Leader Pulse newsletter that we send out every week with actionable insights to help you be the best leader that you can be. We also talked over the last few episodes about the Working Genius. You can learn more about that at workinggenius.com. And also make sure that you check out our manager training program, Leader Academy. And you can do that at leader.com/academy. That's leader.com/academy. Thanks for listening to this season of the Leader Pulse podcast.